and I'm going to do a walkthrough. I'll briefly just say that the shape of life is an overarching idea that addresses both natural history, evolution, human knowledge changing our perceptions of ourself in relation to our place in the universe, and then also how our understanding of nature also changes the way our societies and cultures embrace these new concepts. This is a piece by the artist Musa. This is 10 feet high, 6 foot wide woodblock print. Tim does massive woodblock prints based on experiences on solo treks that he makes in the wilds of America. He had come upon the carcass of a blue whale that he'd watched up on the beach. The animals, seagulls, crabs, and various vultures had picked away so that the carcass had been opened up and he could see the blue whale's heart. He stood and did a drawing of it, despite the stench and smell of the rotting whale, and created this incredible masterpiece that has to do with the cycles of life, death, and birth. There's the heart, and then there's a small redwood tree that was growing out of a fallen tree. So he creates these metaphors about the cycles of life, and it fits beautifully into the show's theme, the shape of life. This work is by the artist Nasim Khatanzadeh. Nasim arrived here from America in her early 20s, late teens. These works deal with both the sort of in-between space of being from another country, living in America, always finding that she's somewhere in between being an American citizen and the cultural origins of her early life. These works also address the non-binary nature of our identities, kind of shifting from male and female to a space in between. This liminal space that she's trying to articulate a iconography and vocabulary of form. There are penises, vaginas, buttholes, all kinds of erotic and playful elements. They also take on the look of seeds, seed pods, plants, and even kind of extraterrestrial alien beings. So the works sort of oscillate between humor and anxiety and are her effort to create a language that sort of represents the in-between space that many people find themselves in our contemporary world. This is the artist Mercedes Dorame. She is a native Tonga artist, people who are indigenous to Los Angeles. Her people have lived here for the last 2,000 years at least, since before the arrival of European settlers. This piece to cross the river, Paksa Tnampuk. This piece here is kind of a ritual space. These objects, the concrete starstones that she creates are replicas of artifacts that are found only here in Los Angeles, that the Tonga people made. Her work is, in a sense, rituals, reenactments of the culture and myths of the Tonga people. And she also does these photographs where she goes into various locations in Los Angeles that were tribal sites and creates these private rituals in which she photographs them. She sees photography as a form of memory that encodes the lands as Tonga spaces. This is the artist Aline Mayer. Aline has created an installation. She wanted to take the kind of traditional images of the lingam and the yoni, the penis and vagina, and create a metaphor and poetic interpretation, kind of shifting them away from the binary notion of male and female into the more slippery, non-binary changing the world is going through. So the phallic image has roses and lichens and different elements to it, sort of bringing it more into an organic space. The yoni, which is a Peruvian artifact, a rattle on one side is a vagina, on the other side is a penis. She has taken the vulva and put a seed, an electro-scanning micrograph of a seed, and placed it in front of it. So it's become sort of a unification of the male and female principles. The mirror below is a hexagon. And the hexagon in occult thought is the representation of male and female, the balancing of male and female. She has placed it below them, surrounded by rock salt. So it becomes sort of a transformative space and a metaphor of the shifting ideas of male and female in our contemporary world. This is the artist Tim Hawkinson. Tim Hawkinson is a multifaceted artist, most usually known as a sculptor. He has done a broad range of fantastic work over the years. This is a series of drawings he has done. He created this specifically for this show. These drawings were achieved using gravity as the prime mover of the ink. It's synthetic paper with India ink. He created an easel that shifts and moves so that the flow of the ink drop moves at whatever speed he wishes. He has a tool that he made that both gets the ink onto the paper, drops, and then another tool is like a little vacuum that stops the ink precisely. So though it has this sort of geometric clarity and articulate volumetric space in this very lean concentric line format, each line has kind of wavers and has this subtle organic quality to it, like a raindrop coming down a window pane. It's titled Ovo. It's an egg form, and the egg couldn't be the more essential notion of the shape of life, the very beginning, the shape from whence we were all born. This is the artist Patty Whitman. Patty often uses images from her home, from her yard. She mentioned how her yard and the enclosure has become even more meaningful in this time of COVID-19 and sheltering in space. So it's even more metaphorically and poetically poignant how she uses her yard and garden. The title of this piece is Raised Bed. This is a raised bed that she had left fallow for the season. She came out of her studio and her dog was sleeping in the bed, and the color of its fur and the brownness of the dirt brought to mind sort of the cycles of life and mortality kind of returning to the earth. She also thought of the painting of Goya, one of the black paintings where the dog is in the landscape, and the fusion of the dog's body with the landscape. So the work is sort of a poetic representation of the mortal coil of moving from sentience to senescence, of our passage and returning back to the earth. Her work has a very haunting quality. The brown wash, the pencil lines, it's present, but it's also very kind of almost vaporous and suggests a space between dreams and wakefulness and life and death. This is the work of Cheyenne Washington. Cheyenne Washington paints with natural pigments. In this series, she's created them from turmeric and spirulina and different herbs, spices, plants. They're all created by herself. They are not light fast, so in time they will change, and the changing colors represents kind of the transition and metamorphosis of life itself. So she's created kind of a poetic marriage of form and content by using these pigments that will change as time passes. Her images are these beautiful light, light in a poetic sense. There's a lightness to them. The body, nature, flowers, plants, all fusing together in this kind of beautiful marriage of our interaction, how our interaction with the natural world. At some point in time, 10,000 years ago or so, we started harvesting, growing crops and changing the plants and shaping them to be more appropriate to our needs, tasting better, being more bountiful. But they've changed us as well. They've shaped our culture and society as we kind of stayed in one place and grew food. So there's a beautiful kind of interaction between her beautifully created, the fluidity of her work, the way she uses the dyes on silk, and that they flow from her in a very immediate, spontaneous way. Both address her own sort of desire to capture her thoughts as they move through her mind, but there's also a very beautiful synthesis of the ideas of her work and human and plant and animal interactions and the idea behind the show, the shape of life. These are my paintings. I have been interested in natural history and the evolution of life on Earth as both a fascinating story, a magical story really of our becoming, of our emergence, of the emergence of consciousness, so that we are these sentient beings who can communicate, create language, our memories and imaginations. And human beings are meaning makers. We create language so that we can communicate because we are social animals, and language and metaphor and poetry is what holds us together as a society and a culture. I use images of life forms from lichens and orchids. The backgrounds are dark matter. There's models of NASA imaging. There are pieces of gold floating around as well. All of these forms are suggestive and sort of mirror each other. It's almost like a fractal mirroring, how so many things correspond in their shape and form. So all of this is, in a broad sense, a representation of the shape of life and my own fascination and interest with our emergence as conscious beings. And my paintings are reflections of in kind of a poetic journey through time and form and life forms to the moment that we emerged as beings that could communicate, speak, create poetry, create paintings, create art, and that makes us as human as we are. This is the artist Jeff Colson. Jeff Colson is a sculptor who has worked here in LA for many years. He creates facsimiles of objects. So when I first saw Jeff's work, I thought it was like assemblage art, but he actually creates each individual thing by hand. And they are sort of representations of the world, but at a distance, with a kind of humorous comedic element. This particular piece is titled Incident. It refers to something that has just happened, something that just occurred, and this is the residual leftover of some event. He had in mind, there was a cartoon many years ago called Andy Capp, and Andy Capp was always arguing with his wife Flo, and the final scenes would usually be Flo throwing a frying pan at him or some object, and all that would be left of Andy is a poof, a cloud of dust. So he had thought of this when he created it as like a poof of dust. But it also looks like a molecular structure, or it could be an alien craft. It's a sort of multi-tiered image that could transform into anything. And I liked how it looked like a molecular structure, which is what I thought it was initially. But I liked that it's sort of this shape-shifting form. He lives in Joshua Tree. I had to drive out and pick it up, bring it back, and it just barely got through the front door. So it created its own incident, its own sort of comedic Buster Keaton-like event when we got it here. But luckily we got it through the gallery. Even in this room, it makes it look like a Magritte painting or something. The object is so uncanny and large, it just seems impossible that it could have gotten through the door. But we ended up having our own incident that gives it even more resonance as a sculptural object in this space.